Good evening, everybody, and welcome to The Point. My name is Cheryl Butler. I'm the Head of Culture here at Eastleigh Borough Council and in charge of a programme that we've been running for 2 years called Recreate, which is funded by the European Union. And it's a trans-channel programme, which means that the partners on the English side are collaborating with partners on the French side of the channel to do a range of interesting events and collaborations to bring art into the centre of towns, to help the profile of those towns and the regeneration of those towns. And we've been doing a huge number of events across the year. Some of you might have come to our Enliven Festival, our Unwrap Festival, and now our film festival. It's quite important as part of this programme that we do cross-border collaborations where we bring French artists into Eastleigh, into the UK, and showcase their work to new audiences. So you're that new audience. And we have a number of French artists who have joined us today who are going to be sort of talking about their work and introducing their work to you through the course of the evening. So you've probably all got a programme as you came in which gives you the running order of this evening's events. But just to tell you a couple of things, we start off with a history of French cinema in the UK, which Professor Lucy Mazdon will be leading on. And then we are going to be showing you some short French films. 2 of them are award-winning French films that have been recommended to us by the French UK Film Festival as good examples of new work coming into this country from France. And then we have also been running a short film competition, and that gives an opportunity for early career artists to submit work in development or things that they are working on or developing at this early stage in their career. And we had 85 entrants to that from both sides of the channel. And we thought we would take an opportunity to show one of the shortlisted French films this evening as part of this programme. And we do have the director of that film, Alice Gauthier, who is with us. She's sitting in the front there. We'll bring her up just before her film so you can see her and then you can ask her all sorts of interesting questions in the interval. We've also got 2 installation pieces that you might have noticed as you came in. There's one in the foyer, which is Penelope Peru, who's a wonderful French dancer, filmmaker, who came and performed live here in Eastleigh as part of our Unwrapped Festival. And then the piece she performed here is also available in a film digital form. And we thought it would be a great opportunity to bring that film to this part of our programme. And then just around the corner from the bar is another new installation piece from Julien Mazdon. Do you want to just wave? Yes. A real French person, French artist in that corner there. And Julien's been an associate here with us at The Point, and he's been developing this work with Portsmouth University and dancers from our venue. And so that's installed in the foyer area, and Julian will be there again in the interval so you can have a chat to him about his work. The other thing to remember is there's no such thing as a free lunch, ladies and gentlemen. We've lured you here with free tickets, but we also would like some feedback from you about what you thought of the evening, what you think about the films that you see, and what you think about the festival overall to help us in our future planning. So there'll be little cards for you to sort of do some comments on before you leave this evening. So I've been rambling on for far too long, so I want to hand over now to Professor Mazdon, who is going to start the real meat of this evening's entertainment. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Cheryl. Thank you. And I will, obviously, being a professor, ramble on even longer than Cheryl. But thanks ever so much for coming along tonight. And it's lovely to see so many people here to enjoy what I hope is going to be a really exciting evening of French cinema. We're lucky enough, as Cheryl said, to have Alice here with us tonight, the director of one of the short films which we've shortlisted for this short film competition. And also later on, we're going to be doing a Q&A with Eric Ormond, who is one of the animators who worked on tonight's feature film, The Illusionist. So I think an exciting night ahead of us. So obviously we're all here to discuss and enjoy French cinema, so I'm assuming that most people in the audience here tonight are probably lovers of French film, and I'm assuming also that you probably watch a fair number of French films. And what I want to do really tonight here briefly is just to say a few words about the history of French cinema in Britain, to say a little bit about what is the French cinema that we experience in this country and how perhaps it might differ in some ways from the French cinema experienced by our friends across the Channel, because I would argue it's perhaps not quite the same thing. Certainly French cinema is historically the most widely distributed non-English language cinema in the British market. With the exception of Bollywood, to a great extent this is still the case. However, this position of apparent strength in comparison to other foreign films fades into complete insignificance, of course, when we compare French cinema to the presence of English language cinema. British cinema screens, as I'm sure you all know, are dominated by English language cinema and mostly by Hollywood, which represents around 95% of British box office takings. The place for foreign language cinema in this country, including French cinema, is actually very small. And the audiences that watch these films are, I think, really equally tiny and, to a certain extent, rather limited in terms of their makeup. It's a certain type of person, on the whole, who tends to watch French films in the UK. Of course, when we talk about films these days, we can't confine ourselves to the cinema alone. Lots of people now watch films in all sorts of ways, and some people don't go to the cinema at all. Recent developments in technology may well seem to offer the potential for a sort of opening up for foreign language cinema. They may, if you like, help with this rather limited presence of foreign language in television in the UK. The opening up of the television landscape, for example, and the proliferation of television channels could seem to be a very positive development. It would seem perhaps to offer the potential for increased diversity. And certainly we are seeing, as I'm sure most of you know, the broadcast of some foreign language dramas on television. The best known of these are the BBC 4 dramas shown on a Saturday night, particularly the Scandi dramas such as The Killing and The Bridge and so on and so forth. Digital services such as Netflix, Love Film and so on, and also specialist channels such as the French specialist channel Cinémois would also, or can also provide access to quite a broad catalogue of foreign language cinema. So all of that's good in many ways. If we love foreign language cinema and foreign language television, we should see this certainly as a positive development. However, I wonder to what extent these developments are actually really changing things. Are they actually extending the range of material on offer and opening it up to new audiences and new types of audience? If we take the example of the BBC 4 dramas, certainly they were hugely critically acclaimed and much discussed in the broadsheet press and on the BBC's own art shows, not surprisingly. But if you look closely at the audiences for these television shows, what we can see is that they actually represent an absolutely tiny share of the broader television audience. Everybody was actually watching The X Factor or Strictly and not watching The Killing, despite what you might read in The Guardian. They love them. The people that watch them love them. But most of the people that watched them were middle class, well-educated, and essentially middle-aged viewers, who I would suspect are probably the same people already going to see foreign language cinema at the cinema. To a certain extent, it was a case, I think, of preaching to the converted. And that raises the question as to why there is this rather limited presence of foreign language cinema in this country. Those of us who go to see it regularly, who enjoy it, who maybe spend our Saturday evenings watching those subtitled dramas, might not realise it, but most people in the UK tend to watch very, very little audiovisual media that's not in the English language. But why is that? Because it's certainly not the same in other countries in Europe. If you go to Germany, Italy, Spain, or indeed France, Hollywood certainly does still dominate. But in the same cinemas where these Hollywood films are showing, you can see a whole range of comedies, thrillers, romances, and so on and so forth from other countries across Europe and indeed around the world. And why is that? Well, the difference, of course, is language. Films in Germany, Italy, Spain, and as well in France are routinely dubbed, and as such, The national identity and the language is of very little concern to the average cinema goer. Cinephiles in those countries may dislike dubbing, and they may well choose to see art house films, the art house films they favour with subtitles, but the majority cinema-going audience will quite happily watch dub films from all over the world, just as they watched dub versions of Hollywood movies. So, it's perhaps not surprisingly, it would seem then that it is the dominance of the English language that is the problem. We're not in the UK really a translating culture. If we take the example of literature, there's been a change in recent years, largely due to the popularity of the kind of Scandi crime fiction, like the Stieg Larsson Dragon trilogy, which is, as many of you will know, and I'm sure perhaps many of you have enjoyed reading it. It's been hugely, hugely popular. But that's actually quite an unusual development. Typically in the UK, we translate very little, and the majority of fiction sold in our bookshops was originally in the English language. And this transposes to film. Similarly, just like the situation with literature, the Hollywood cinema which dominates our screens is, of course, in our own language, or some might argue a version of it, and we are not really used to the foreign. We're not really used to hearing the foreign on our cinema or television screens. And of course, we also don't dub in this country as a general rule, and most people, certainly people who like cinema, who enjoy cinema, the very people who like coming to see foreign language cinema at their local art house movie theatre, they tend not to like dub films. I might be wrong, but I suspect many people sitting here tonight would prefer not to see a dubbed film. They would much rather watch it with subtitles, and I would number myself amongst those people. And that, of course, creates its own problems, because people don't like dubbed films, but a lot of people, including quite a lot of my students, I have to say, also don't like subtitles. And so therein lies the rub. You have a whole load of cinema which people won't see, can't see, because they can't get over the barrier of language. And you can trace this particular problem, if you like, right back to the coming of sound cinema in the late 1920s. It was the coming of sound cinema at the end of the 1920s which sort of set, if you like, this linguistic cat among the pigeons. Because before the advent of sound cinema, language just wasn't really an issue. Dialogue in film was limited to a relatively limited series of intertitles, which were very easily translated. And French cinema had found a very ready market in the UK and, of course, around the world. Throughout the early years of the 20th century, it was a very, very productive and very successful cinema. But the advent of synchronised sound left British distributors and exhibitors facing the problem of what to do with films made in a language indecipherable to the masses. What could you now do with these films, which were now so obviously foreign? Where could they be shown, and who would watch them? Next one. Well, the solution that came about was I would argue, to a certain extent, what set in place the discourses around foreign language cinema, which have remained with us, I think, up to this day. The first was the London Film Society, which was established in 1925 by a group of intellectuals and socialites, including Iris Barry, the film critic, who you can see here. Apologies for the slightly distorted image. I think she didn't have quite such a stretched face as that. And alongside her here, Ivor Montagu, another of the founding members of the Film Society. Now, the Film Society was set up to bring cinema to people who love cinema. It was all about establishing and celebrating cinema as an art form, and that's absolutely crucial. It wasn't about film as entertainment, it was about appreciating the artistic qualities of film. And it was also about educating people in the value and the aesthetics of film, okay? And it was a society, which meant that people had to join, they had to pay a membership fee. And it was a membership fee which, for its day, was actually rather expensive. So automatically, many people would be excluded from joining the society, just simply because they wouldn't be able to afford it. And the people who ran it, I mean, they love cinema. The likes of Iris Barry and Ivor Montagu, Sidney Bernstein, and so on. They would travel all over the continent, sourcing films that they could then bring back in their suitcases to show to the members of the Film Society. They loved cinema. They believed in cinema. They thought it was a vital, exciting art form. but it was about educating people, and it was about establishing film as an art form. Okay, and was as such distinctive from the sort of development of cinema as a form of entertainment, which was going alongside it in sort of mainstream movie theatres at the time. So what this meant was it was a very middle class because only people with a certain level of income could afford to join the society. And if you like, it was setting foreign language cinema apart from the mainstream. It was specialising foreign language cinema. The other, sorry, before I move on to the next thing, Iris Barry in an interview in 1963, talking about the Film Society, kind of underlines this distinctiveness, if you like. She said, "Never were so many limousines seen in Regent Street." This is where the Film Society showed its films. "Never were so many limousines seen in Regent Street on a Sunday afternoon, where the general decorum imposed by the presence of ladies in waiting from the palace and of so many celebrities was only occasionally threatened by a deliberate, if polite, booing of a nature study short, or a shout of acclamation, mainly from Oxford and Cambridge students at the front of the hall, at some strikingly novel and effective bit of technique in some of the Russian features." So you can see what's going on here. You know, it's all about taste and education and the appreciation of quality. Okay, so a very sort of specialised and rather elite venue. The other venue which took up the mantle of showing foreign language cinema in the 1930s were the so-called Continental cinemas, and these are a few woodcuts from slightly later periods from the Academy Cinema. The Academy Cinema was opened in Oxford Street in 1931 by Eric Hakim, and it was the UK's first permanent art cinema. It was swiftly followed by the Everyman in Hampstead in 1933, which was set up by James Fairfax Jones, who had previously been treasurer of the Southampton Film Society. And then in 1934, the Marquis de Casamori opened the Curzon in Mayfair. These are all names that you're going to be familiar with, the Curzon, the Everyman, and so on. And these films also showed continental films, foreign language films, films from France, Germany, Soviet Russia, less and less from Russia, of course, and Germany as the 1930s progressed for obvious political reasons. But a bit like the Film Society, these venues also transformed that cinema. They were less exclusive than the Society. They were cinemas, you could just simply buy a ticket and go in. But nevertheless, they were the continental cinemas. They were different to other cinemas. And a bit like the Film Society, they automatically made foreign language cinema into something rather different to what they were in France. Here again, they were being set apart from the mainstream. Now, it's interesting that it was out of the Film Society that came the decision that the best solution to the language barrier of foreign cinema was subtitling. And this was a rather intellectual, I think, rather elitist decision. It was all about preserving the integrity of film as an art form, which was at the heart of the Film Society's aims. And indeed, some of the earliest subtitles, the likes of Julia Wolfe, for example, were members of the Film Society, and they subtitle films specifically for the uses of the Society. And it seems to me that the continuing dominance of subtitling in the United Kingdom has, in many ways, in which, as I say, this is subtitling which came out of the Film Society, but the continuing dominance of subtitling has, in many ways, I think, perpetuated this vision of film and relegated, if you like, foreign language cinema to the domain of the specialised or the elite. Foreign language cinema is somehow a quality cinema, or perhaps even a rather difficult cinema. And interestingly, the director René Clair, who was very popular in France and enjoyed a certain amount of success over here in the 1930s as well, he was interviewed by the critic Caroline Lejeune in 1939, and he was very clear about what was happening to French cinema over here. He said, "Make no mistake about the French cinema. The ordinary bread and butter French picture is just the same as ever. We have as many bad films in France as you have in England, only you people don't see them. The vogue for French films abroad is largely mere exoticism. You admire French films as we in Paris admire the big Hollywood production. They are foreign and interesting." And I think that neatly sums up exactly what was going on, and to a great extent still goes on today. French film, when shown in Britain, in other words, becomes something rather different to that experienced by the audiences back in France. Only a select choice of films is shown in select venues to a select audience. There have, of course, over the years been attempts to move French film from the confines of the specialised or art cinema location. There's also been a number of attempts to dub films over the years. In the 1970s in particular, there were quite a lot of attempts at dubbing films, and again in this kind of trying to move it out from the confines of the art cinemas and so on to get it to wider audiences. And more recently, a very good example of this is the Taxi series of films. I don't know if any of you have had the misfortune to sit through these, they're not great. Luc Besson produced a series of car chase movies, but set in various locations around France, Marseille, Paris, and so on and so forth. Clearly, this is not art house cinema, okay? This is really pure commercial, fair. I mean, if you like car chase films, they're all right. It's not my favourite thing, I have to say. But as a result, they weren't really going to please your average audience for French cinema in the UK. Most people who come to watch French cinema in the UK, either at the Point or Harbour Light Cinema or wherever it may be, probably aren't necessarily huge fans of the car chase movie. So they tried to dub them and get them into the likes of the Odeon and Vue Cinema and so on. But it wasn't a success because people don't like dubbed films. And there was still something slightly foreign about them. So these attempts at moving out haven't always been hugely successful. There was a time, though, when there was a certain amount of success, and that was in the 1950s. What happened in the 1950s was that the Hollywood product began to dry up because of the decline of the Hollywood studio system. As many of you will know, the big studios in Hollywood in the 1950s had to break down. The vertical integration was stopped, and it meant they couldn't control both distribution, exhibition, and production. And so, for a period of time, they were making less films. And the major circuits in the UK were just about able to fill their screens, but the second and third run cinemas increasingly started to turn to Continental films to fill their schedules. And about half of these films came from France. And it was in this context that Britain saw the first circuit release of a French film. A French film, for the first time ever, was rolled out across the Odeon circuit, okay, so right across the country, no longer confined to one of the specialist cinemas. And that film was Henri-Georges Clouzot's The Wages of Fear. I'm suspecting some of you will have seen this film. It's a great film. It's kind of a car chase film in a way, I suppose, but a slow car chase film, but very exciting. And it was rolled out across the country by the Odeon in 1954, and then was subsequently judged Film of the Year by the British Academy of Film. And it was an ideal film to fill the gaps left on the circuit by Hollywood. It's a suspense film. It focuses on kind of high tension action over dialogue. It also has basically a multilingual dialogue and a multinational cast. And it was a Franco-Italian co-production. So it was all part, if you like, of an attempt to create a popular European cinema which could compete with Hollywood's international appeal. So it was, in many ways, trying not to be a French film anyway. So it was a film that kind of did fit well into this kind of space that was being created by the lack of Hollywood films. And all of this meant that it was a film which was rather different from other continental films of the period. A film which in many ways was much more akin to the products of Hollywood than to the films of France. If we just go on to the next slide. And this was a quote from Derek Granger, who was film critic in the Times in 1954, and he says, as you can see, filmgoers should be aware that they will be submitting themselves to a fairly gruelling ordeal, and that they will also be seeing a film containing elements of toughness and violence which we have come more to associate with the American thriller than with the close-quartered intimacy of the best French films. So setting up here again those distinctions, Hollywood cinema is one thing, French cinema is another, but this is a film which kind of blurs those boundaries, if you like. And the film was very successful, and cinema goers were apparently seen queuing around the block to get a ticket to see the film. It did really, really well and was a complete breakthrough for French cinema. But it was a short-lived moment, because Hollywood, of course, regrouped, and Hollywood films began to flood the market again. And also in France, what we see, of course, at the end of the 1950s and into the early 1960s is the advent of the French New Wave. And here again, this, if you like, positioned French film as an art film product. So the brief window of opportunity for French cinema in this country was to a great extent closed down, and the French cinema we saw over here and the place it occupied kind of reverted to type. Another significant development in the 1950s, however, was the introduction of the X certificate. Now, this was something of a poison chalice for French cinema. The new classification category came as a blessing, since it opened doors for a national cinema still marginalised by the critics. A lot of French films weren't shown over here because they were deemed a bit too racy, but with the X certificate, they could now be shown, admitted, albeit to a limited audience. But the result of this, to a certain extent, was an influx of films replete with scenes of crime and prostitution and nymphomania and so on and so forth. A lot of distributors sort of really leapt on the bandwagon and bought the most kind of racy films they could, just so they could get them out with the X, which became quite a useful marketing tool. And these were films which were not indicative of French cinema or indeed of French life, but they were, if you like, films which to some extent mirrored the ways many Brits like to think of France, as a little bit sexy and even a little bit sordid. And I think, again, this is another perception which is really sort of stuck with the way we see French cinema in this country. And in the last 20 years, this perception of French cinema has been, I think, perpetuated by a number of auteurs in France. People such as Catherine Breillat, Claire Denis and Patrice Chéreau, and also more sensationalist directors such as Gaspard Noé, who have continued to sort of up the ante on very graphic depictions of sex and violence. And I think it says a lot about British attitudes to the French, that despite some public opposition, Breillat's very explicit romance was passed by the BBFC in this country on the grounds that it is a particularly French piece in the frank way it addresses sexual issues. In other words, you can be that explicit, it's okay because it's French, and so it's art, okay? So, it would seem to me that to a great extent it's sex and art, or as the title of my recently published book would have it, Sex, Art and Cinephilia, which really seem to be the tropes which sort of define our expectations of French cinema in this country. And these tropes, as I hope I'm beginning to suggest, have got a very long history. Now, describing his journey into the academic discipline of French studies back in the 1950s, Professor John Stokes recalls his trips to the State Cinema on Leytonstone High Road in East London. She's gone to the next slide. It's a rather blurry picture of the State back in the day. And he says, "It was at the State that my dreams of France were born, giving me first of all a taste for film culture that was already slightly out of date, and yet, in comparison with the life surrounding, seemed excitingly alien. Even the comedies of Fernandel had a raw, raucous quality, while romantic dramas starring, say, Michel Morgan or Charles Boyer possessed a satiny, erotic style that was distinctly un-Essex." I'm not sure that would necessarily hold sway today, but anyway. Stokes' remarks then recall a very particular film culture, a time in the 1950s when, as we've discussed, French films briefly escaped the confines of the Continental movie theatres and were found in mainstream picture houses such as the State. A time when the great works of the past sat alongside and then were gradually replaced by the new cinema emerging from France. And a time when trips to see French films were motivated both by a rather highbrow love of all things French and a rather more commonplace search for titillation. And Stokes looks back at the weekly advertisements for the State in the contemporary press, and he says, "When my mother reproached me for going to see sexy French films in a seedy part of town, I told her that the films were art, and I despised her ignorant prejudice. Now I see, as I read the Stratford Express for 1958, that the State regularly advertised art films of a dubious kind. So we were both right. The films may have been art, but they were certainly sexy too." And I think that his recollections are interesting because they provide us with a really very eloquent summary of some of the key sort of discourses which have shaped French cinema's place in the United Kingdom over the last 80 or so years. Francophilia and cinephilia, sex and art. And particularly striking, I think, is Professor Stokes' confession of the role French films played in nurturing his desire for France, and more importantly even in his sense of his own identity. Watching French films took him away from the humdrum streets of Leytonstone and transported him to a culture in which he sensed he could achieve his ambitions and become the man he wanted to be. And he gets very confused. He was very confused, apparently, over that infamous scene of cunnilingus in Louis Malle's Les Amants. And this only reinforced his belief that he felt sure that French audiences would have no difficulty at all in interpreting that scene. He said they would have been able to read the codes because they too had done these things. It seemed equally certain that my neighbours had no such fund of personal experience to help them find their way around the film. So his love, if you like, for French film was closely connected to a deep investment in French culture and to a belief that watching these films could somehow make him different or even better than his fellow citizens of Leytonstone, who no doubt didn't go to see foreign films at all. And this belief in the quality of French film and the improving qualities it's able to provide, again, is a theme we can see threading throughout the story of French cinema's place in Britain. I think we can all be a little bit guilty sometimes of thinking we're perhaps a little bit better as we sit and watch our subtitled movie than the people in the cinema next door watching, a car chase film from Hollywood. So this enduring belief in the quality of French cinema has endured, I think, since the 1930s. This belief that French cinema is a cinema of art. It's a quality cinema. It's different to the films of Hollywood. But is it? Is this actually true? And I think the problem is when we start thinking about French cinema like that is that we forget about a whole load of French cinema which we perhaps don't get to see in this country. The most popular genres in French filmmaking in the post-war period and really up to the present day, in other words, the films most people in France are actually watching are comedies, thrillers, and indeed, certainly during the 1970s, pornography. And not that many of those films enjoy huge amounts of success over here. There are some exceptions. The films of Jacques Tati, for example, and of course we're going to watch The Illusionist later, which is based on a script written by Tati, so a nice synergy there. But his films did well in this country. Why? Because there's very little dialogue in them. Okay, so they were some comedy films which did well in the UK, but there's not that many that managed to make that kind of crossover. It's always been a problem. Obviously, there is no such thing as French cinema. There are all sorts of French cinemas, but the problem is that in the UK, we only get to see a certain type of French cinema, and to a certain extent that is defined by quite a narrow group of people, just as it was back in the days of the Film Society in the early 1930s. I would suggest that it's perhaps fair to see French cinema in Britain as a sort of stalwart, if you like, of foreign language cinema. I think it typically appeals to middle-class audiences and cinephiles who like a taste of the cinematic exotic, but for the most part don't want anything too challenging. Mostly I would suggest that the British want their French films just French enough. They want recognisable genres and forms, and typically they like films which offer the possibility for some kind of cinematic tourism. We tend to like films over here, French films which sort of take us to France, if you like. And French films have, as a result, I think, long traded on their sort of exotic exteriors to seduce British spectators. We'll just get to the next. Good example of this, Claude Berry's Pagnol adaptations of the late 1980s, which did very well for French films in this country. They were hugely successful back home, and it did pretty well over in the UK. And of course, they embodied and reinforced many sort of much-loved British middle-class stereotypes of France. Their huge appeal, to a great extent, lay in their sort of depiction of these idyllic Provençal landscapes and the idealised notion of living off the land, which, of course, at the time was echoing Peter Mayle's Provence novels, which were doing so well in the bookshops, and which had sort of heralded, loads of middle-class people heading off to try and buy themselves a second home in the south of France. And yet, and there's other, if we can do the next slide, other Pagnol adaptations, a more recent one, La Fille du Puisatier, which was released in 2011, and also a long history of Pagnol adaptations. And these have also enjoyed a certain amount of success with British audiences. Jean Keval, the critic writing in Sight and Sound in 1953, noted British love for the films of Pagnol, which were, in his opinion, vastly overestimated in Hollywood and Hampstead for obvious reasons of exoticism. And I think as British audiences fell in love with Audrey Tautour's gamine Amélie and her adventures in a rather artfully kitsch Montmartre, we were reminded again of this love for films which are both recognisably and yet unthreateningly French. Films which featured much loved locations, the south of France, Paris, so on and so forth, familiar genres and forms, and perhaps even a recognisable star. And it seems to me these are the French movies which seem to appeal to those cinema goers with a taste for the films of France. And the relative failure of rather more challenging art house fare and also of more populist products such as the Taxi series, which I mentioned a moment ago, reveals, I think, that attempts to move beyond these rather narrowly but clearly defined tastes generally don't do very well. Okay? So in other words, British audiences tend to know what kind of French films they like, and the distributors know as well, and that's essentially to some extent what we get. So what's the future then for French cinema in Britain in the 21st century? As I suggested at the start of my talk, I do think that recent developments in technology could certainly offer a wider range of possibilities for the consumption of French film, and audiences certainly no longer necessarily need to be reliant on a handful of distributors and exhibitors. The arrival of the specialist French movie channel Cinémoire in 2009 established one dedicated forum for people willing to pay a subscription to watch French movies. Initiatives which were set in place by the now defunct UK Film Council also, I think, seem promising. The publicly funded Independent Cinema Office also supports the British presence of non-mainstream cinema. And also, and I think perhaps most importantly, the proliferation of film festivals such as the French Film Festival UK, it's easy for me to say, which Cheryl mentioned a moment ago. They also, I think, are very encouraging as they provide an alternative distribution forum for films, including French films, which may not otherwise achieve a presence at all in Britain. And Richard Moe, who's the director of the French Film Festival, has claimed that the horizons of British cinephiles have expanded dramatically over the past couple of decades. He says that they're now incredibly discerning punters, very aware of what's out there and very aware festivals are going to be their only realistic chance of seeing a really good range of French films. So certain people who are prepared to access and attend a festival, then yes, certainly there is perhaps a little bit more choice on offer. But despite these certainly very positive developments, the language that surrounds these films is still, I think, very telling. We're still hearing about specialised films, non-mainstream films, alternative films. They're still the terms that are being used to refer to so much foreign language and French language film in the UK. So we still have, I think, a very clear split between English language cinema, particularly Hollywood on the one hand, and foreign language film on the other. And I think Moe's comments do perhaps go to the heart of the matter. The festivals are the only realistic chance of seeing a good range of French films. General distribution remains narrow, and festival audiences are, of course, rather limited. The UK Film Council was axed in 2010, so those exciting initiatives which seemed to be very promising for foreign language cinema sort of to a certain extent disappeared with them. The impact of a specialist channel such as Cinémoire is limited, and of course to some extent it just ghettoises French cinema, kind of hiving it off again from the mainstream. And even DVD could be seen as something of a poison chalice. The huge profits it can engender often lead some distributors to limit cinematic release to just a few days and provide a means to acquiring the rights to far more lucrative small screen products. So DVD can actually limit the cinematic presence of some films. Digital streaming and services such as Curzon Online, I think, are great because they do get films out of the sort of metropolitan centres, because one of the problems in this country is that a lot of films never get much beyond London. So they're great from that point of view. They do open up things geographically. But again, I still tend to think they haven't found ways of reaching new types of audience. I still suspect it's the same kinds of people who are accessing these services and the foreign language films they show. So I guess, and I don't want to be too pessimistic, although I do tend to be a bit that way, but I think that the spaces for French films in the UK are still a little bit limited, which is why it's so lovely to have this opportunity to show some films and hopefully perhaps to reach out to some new audiences here tonight. I think just as was the case in the 1930s, in many ways the French films that we see in Britain are determined by a rather select group of individuals, distributors, exhibitors, and of course critics who have the sort of last say in what gets here, and as such to a certain extent define for us what French cinema can or should be. And I think one of the real problems being posed for French film in this country is illustrated very well by the difficulties faced by the distributors of Tell No One in 2007. I don't know if any of you have seen this film. It's actually based on an American novel by Harlan Coben. It's a thriller. It's a great film, very, very well shot, very, very, very pacey. But Justin Marciano, who was head of Revolver Pictures, who were distributing the film in this country at the time, he said, because the film was not hidden, the Michael Haneke film, which was gone down extremely well with critics at the time, because the film was not hidden or highbrow, I felt many critics unfairly marked it down for being accessible. In other words, if the French film is too populist, it doesn't match British expectations of French cinema. If it's too difficult, distributors will be reluctant to take on a film with such limited audience appeal. French film, as has perhaps always been the case, is reduced to a particular idea of what British audiences want to see, which I think in many ways is rather a shame. And ultimately, what I think this reveals to us is the vital importance of exhibition and language in the place of French and other non-English language cinema in the UK. It's where the film is shown, which to a certain extent dictates who sees it, obviously, but also shapes the identity of that film. Many people simply won't go to see a film in an art house cinema because they presume it's not for them. And of course, language is the other issue. Many people simply won't go and see a subtitled film. So what should we do? Next slide. Do we get rid of the subtitles, and then you might reach out of the art house circuit? Yet unfortunately, most attempts in dubbing have proved to be something of a failure. So it would seem that perhaps isn't a solution. Another possibility is to make an English language French film, and here's a few examples. Igor in this country, I think, an animated film. It was a French film, but it was shown, throughout this country to kids, including mine, and nobody knew it was a French film, I suspect, because of course in animated films this is not necessarily a problem. The Liam Neeson vehicle Taken, also a French movie, but I suspect many of the people who enjoyed it in the cinema would not have had any idea of that. And of course you've got The Artist. The Artist, yes, a French film, but there's no language at all, so language wasn't a problem, so it did extremely well. So what do we do? Just get rid of language entirely? Well, perhaps not very realistic, but, the other option is to show that French thriller, such as, Tell No One, to show it at the mainstream multiplex, to show it at the Vue rather than at the Point or Harbour Lights or whatever. These films are very similar to the Hollywood products that people consume in the masses in those cinemas. But my suspicion is that if you showed those films there, they would be boycotted by the people who tend to go to those cinemas because they're in French. But they'd also probably lose their traditional audience, who maybe, all of them, but many of them may not be too keen on going to the Vue or the Odeon because they like to watch their films in an art house venue. So it's a real double bind, I think, for foreign language cinema. And as I hope I've begun to demonstrate in my brief talk today, and apologies if I've rushed through it somewhat, and I've probably gone over my time and Cheryl will murder me, but I think really in conclusion all I can say is that history and habit would suggest that really for French cinema in this country there really are no easy answers. And just to finish off, last couple of slides, these are just spoofs, but I thought they kind of summed this up rather nicely. This is obviously from The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, All the Rape, No Subtitles, and then the last one, there we are, from Spoof for the Artist, Pure Art. And it kind of, I think they encapsulate rather nicely this sort of rendering of foreign language cinema as being somehow better than its American counterparts. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm not sure if we have time for questions. I'm very happy to take a couple, or we can leave it to the end. I don't have a watch on me, and I have...
Is there a couple of quick questions?
Briefly, you talked about your animation, and I was just wondering what was your thought about the French animation industry? Because they seem to be doing rather well abroad,
Yes.
So they seem to be like a success story.
Absolutely. The French animation industry is hugely successful, and also the French, the French involvement in and French developments in sort of in other forms of technology, sort of digital technology and so on. So then, and there's a number of, as you say, a number of animated films which have come out of France, which have done well because they you can dub, they are dubbed, and that's fine. But also French involvement in a number of Hollywood products in terms of digital. They do the digital work for quite a lot lot of big budget Hollywood films. And again, that's something that's not known. I think it kind of that kind of raises this question of what do we mean by a French film? French films are not just films in French, but once you move them out of France, sometimes it's hard to get people thinking like that. But no, certainly the French animation industry is booming at the moment, as tonight's film will demonstrate.
London, the sixth French city in terms of population. Do you see any change?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, one of the problems for foreign language cinema in this country is it's incredibly London-centric. If you go to London, you can see, quite a good range of cinema, of non-English language cinema, and I think certainly the growth of the sort of French community within London has meant that the presence of French cinema in certain parts of London has increased. Having said that, I'm not sure it's necessarily hugely expanded the range of films on offer, but anyway. But I mean, the problem is it's only in London, and those films never get out of London, and that's, again, long been the case. I mean, if you go back to the Film Society and the specialised cinemas, the Film Societies in London, the Film Society movement did spread across the country, but it was much more limited, and then it kind of died away. And the other Continental movie theatres, there was one in Glasgow, one in various cities around, but it was basically a London-based thing. And so yes, I think that's probably had some shift, but then that opposition between London and the rest of the country has always been a problem, and one would not want to see the two as identical, if you like. But it's a good point, interesting point.